Hi there. Welcome to Turning Point. I'm your host, Blaine Bertsch, co-founder and CEO at Dryrun Financial Modeling Software, where we help the office of the CFO leave spreadsheets behind and model anything from cash flow through to complex scenarios with clarity and control. And joining me today is Eli Portnoy of BackEngine, where they analyze every customer interaction so that everyone from the front line through to the C-suite reacts faster to customer needs. Thanks for joining the show, Eli.
Thanks so much for having me.
So before we dive into what you're doing now, because it does sound really interesting, I want to go back to where you got started, sort of professionally, and really where you got the first bit of interest in being an entrepreneur.
So the story probably starts in when I was in college. In my freshman year, most of my classmates and friends were getting jobs like summer internships, and I don't know why. I just like it was so not appealing, and I was so behind the eight ball, and I wasn't a good interviewer. And for whatever reason, I'm like looking at the summer coming up in 2, 3 weeks. I'm like, I don't have anything to do. And I had a friend who was in kind of a similar boat, and I reached out to him and I said, "Hey, I've been working on this idea. Want to just give it a go? Like we'll spend 3 months trying to figure it out, see if it works." And the basic idea, so we were these, 18, 19-year olds, and what we thought about doing was basically going to minor league baseball stadiums and seeing if we could negotiate the right to distribute a little magazine, like almost like a playbill, at their games, and then go to local advertisers and try to basically package up a bunch of these little league stadiums and the advertising rights in those playbills, if you will, and see if we could do that. And we went out. We probably talked to like 7 or 8 minor league baseball teams, and we got the rights for one of them, and we put together a booklet for one of them, and we went out and we tried to find local advertisers, and we sold like $5,000 worth. Maybe it was even less than that, but it was a few $1,000s worth of ads. And there we were on the game day distributing the. It was so much fun, and we were in the stadium, and it was amazing. And like probably between the two of us, we made like two, maybe $3,000 across the entire summer. But it was so much fun. It was invigorating, and it gave me the confidence that like I can actually build something. Maybe this isn't it. Maybe there's not enough money here, but I can build something. And
Mm-hmm.
from that moment on, it's all I ever thought about.
Yeah, like that. Even if you came out negative dollar wise, the experience of doing something like that is so, because it's the first time of doing anything, and especially I remember like doing the first sort of services I was doing, and getting clients and getting paid for them, and it's like the first ones are so rocky. Like, nothing ever goes smooth right out of the gate, right? um so you I'm assuming you finished off college. What did you take in college? Was it business related or just something unrelated to that?
It wasn't. I studied international relations and political science, and I thought I would maybe be a lawyer. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do, but it was so fascinating and interesting to have these discussions around just like how government works and how it interacts with itself, and just how to think about like the business of government. I found it fascinating, but it was not. I don't think I ever wanted to do that. Once I had done this like this summer thing, I was all in. It just like it
Yeah.
demystified. It felt like this super intimidating thing, and then once I got there, I'm like, there's no right or wrong answer. You just got to figure it out. And
Mhm.
I was like, I think I can do this.
Yeah, I'm not surprised at all, because there's been, I think we're on episode 78 right now, and um I can't remember. Maybe there's one or two that actually had formal business training. Like virtually nobody does, and we all just sort of dive in and just like school of hard knocks, right? And but I think a lot of it is because, like when I went to university, I took design. I had a couple different degrees in design, but what it gave me was the service that I could sell, right?
Yeah.
And that's where I think a lot of it comes from, is that expertise that you can sell. If you have formal business training, is sometimes it's like, well, I actually don't have anything, so I got to find something, right? So yeah, definitely can see that. So when you graduated, where did you, like, what was your, you walk out of college and go, okay, what am I going to do? Like, what did you start with?
Yeah. So I made a big mistake coming out of college. I got caught up in the sort of social pressures of like recruiting and trying to get the best possible job, and all of the people I was with were all like focused on consulting and banking, and I just got caught up in it. And so I actually got a job as a management consultant, and I went there right after college, and I stayed there for about 11 months. And man, I was miserable. I really did not enjoy it because
Yeah.
over the course of the 11 months, like my job was to move boxes around on a slide and like make sure that they were perfectly aligned. And I was like, I feel like I could be like doing more. And even if I can't, I feel like I could definitely be learning more. And I
Mhm.
just wanted to leave and start a company. And I just like, I couldn't like, I can't express like the visceral feeling that I felt every day walking into that office and thinking, man, I'm going to spend the next 12 hours just moving boxes around on a spreadsheet, on a slide, and moving numbers around on a spreadsheet. So I did that for 11 months until I couldn't do it anymore.
Well, it's also like I've had experiences like that, also really valuable experiences because when times start getting tough and you're an entrepreneur and you have like that's a lot of battles that you're facing, right? And but having those experiences are also like, yeah, but I ain't going back to that. Right? So
Exactly.
it's I had my share of difficult summer jobs, and then I had a job for just a couple of years after university, and then I was just once I was out on my own, I was like I never went back. And but it's still you learn from all those experiences. So hit the 11-month mark, you're like, no, I'm out. So what do you do now?
So I didn't have a great idea, but I had the beginnings of something that I thought was really powerful. So this is 2005. I had just gone through that whole recruiting process. Talk about like experiences, no matter what, how big of a mistake, they're all helpful and you learn from them. I'd gone through the recruiting experience and I'd gotten a chance to use the college recruiting services, but I'd also used monster.com and hot jobs and all of these sites that were coming up to help you find jobs. Now, I'm originally from Mexico, and one of the things that I saw was that I was really privileged getting to go to a great American university. And so when I was looking for jobs, I knew how to use these sites. I spoke English well, and I had access to the internet. But there was this whole swath of the market, basically the low income bracket, where it was like dishwashers and construction workers and busboys and waiters that were not using these sites. They were basically using job agencies, where basically they would go to this like mom and pop business. They would say, hey, I really want to get this kind of job. They would help them find one, and they would charge them 2 weeks wage up front. They would basically tell them, for the right to find a job, you are going to have to pay me 2 weeks. And I was like, man, that just feels wrong. Like there's got
Yeah.
to be a better way. And so I started working on how do I try to bring together this idea of the internet and the distribution that the internet brings to the job market for a demographic that really didn't speak English and didn't have access to regular internet. And that became my calling, like my calling card. That became what I focused on, and um, went through lots of iterations trying to figure that one out. A lot of really bad ideas along the way, and then eventually got to something that I thought was a little bit better. But um, yeah, so and I can share the whole story if you'd like, or
Yeah, I'd love to hear it because that was a very interesting time because that was kind of after the dot bomb.
yeah,
People had lost confidence in the web. They how many people at that time were kind of like, no, the web is useless and done. And meanwhile, everything's moving online. People don't even realize it. But it did make for a bit of a challenging time. Yeah, I'm curious. Like that's early on, and starting a web based business at that time is quite different from 2025, right?
it was. So my first idea was, okay, the employers have access to the internet. They're comfortable using monster.com and so on and so forth. So let me build a site for them. And then when they post a job, I'm just going to automatically translate it and print it in a little handout. Going back to my roots, doing that in the college days, I'm like going to print one out and then I'm going to go sell ads against it. And we did that. We built a very janky little site. Employers started posting jobs. We would take those jobs. And when we didn't have enough jobs, I would go on Craigslist and grab those and basically translate them, and I put them into this booklet, and I went to all these bodegas and all these stores all across New York and basically put them out there. And I learned a couple of things. So the first was these things got picked up like you couldn't believe. Like within moments of me putting down a stack of 150 of them, they were gone. That was
Mm,
great.
yeah.
The problem was it took so long to actually like go from collecting the job to printing it to distributing it to it getting picked up to someone calling, that like the jobs were gone by the
Mm,
time people started to call. And so I started to think, okay, well, clearly there's a need on both sides, and clearly there's even a more acute need with the job seeker side. How do I just compress this and make it happen faster? And then the second thing I was thinking is like, wow, the economics of this are really bad because it was so expensive to print and distribute. How do I try to like
mm,
lean into the internet to compress those costs? And what I came up with was basically a telephone based system where the job seeker would call into our system. We had a 1-800 number. They would tell us a bit about, in this automated way, tell us a bit about who they were, what experiences they had, what they, almost like a little interview. We would then turn that into a profile. And when an employer would post a job on our website, we would use a phone system to like basically figure out who was a match and immediately robocall them. And the job seeker
mm,
would get a call and it would be like, hey, we have a job. This is what the job is. If you're interested, press one. We'll connect you to the employer. And then we connected them for a call. And we were able to do 100 calls an hour. And so within an hour or two of posting, we could have 3, 4, 5 people who were
mm.
qualified and interested in the job connected with you for a phone call. And that solved the two issues that I had around cost and time, but it created a third issue, which was even now, like once I connected someone who told me they wanted a job, they didn't show up. They just weren't showing up for jobs.
Mm.
And so then we had to go through a whole series of experimentation to figure out, do we send them like directions? Do we remind them? Like all the things that we had to do. But that ended up being the biggest challenge because our retention rate on the employer side was low because they'd post a job, they talk to 5, 6 people, and two would say they would show up and only one would or no one would, and they would get
Mm.
frustrated. And that made it really hard to scale this business.
Yeah, that's problems that I would never even have thought of until you actually kind of go through it, right? So
Yeah.
you said you did get to something that kind of worked in this sort of realm. What was that? Was that the like? Where did you get to the point where I was like, okay, it's actually kind of working?
Yeah. So what worked was getting job seekers was super easy. Like it was incredibly cheap, incredibly easy. We were getting tens of thousands of them signed up to our system. We also found a really interesting monetization model. So what we would do is we went to like English as a second language and technical schools and basically all of these products that were relevant to this demographic. And we said, hey, you can sponsor this job thing that they're doing, and we'll basically play an audio prompt explaining them like how they can up level themselves with English or with technical skills. And if they, after their call, if they want, they can just press 2 and we'll connect them directly to you. And they would pay pretty substantial money for every lead. So that was working as well. The employer side was the piece that wasn't working so well.
Mm.
And so while we started to generate some decent revenue and some decent growth, I misunderstood the dynamics on the employer side and how important it was to really figure that out. And I started to expand. And so while I think now with more experience, I could have made it work. At that point, I really couldn't. And I started expanding into a second and a third city. And eventually I imploded the business just because I overexpanded.
Yeah, and it's so easy to do. Like
Yeah.
one of the last episodes I did a couple of weeks ago, I remember the founder telling me that they thought they had product market fit twice and didn't, and it was like third
So
time's the
hard.
charm. And I'm just like, yeah, no, I've been there. Actually, just got through number three. Like, it's like, yep, that's because you can see the signs, and it's like you want so bad to be like, yeah, this is working. You see things that are working, and sometimes it's easy to overlook some of the things that aren't, right. and
Yeah.
and yeah, it's that's every entrepreneur's been there, but it's makes such a challenge. So okay, so that business you went, okay, this another great learning experience, but you actually grew, had some traction, everything with it. What was your next venture after that, or what did you try and tackle after that experience?
I was super, super burnt out. It was a devastating experience because I felt like we got so close and I put everything I had into it from a time, sweat, but also from a money standpoint. I
Mm,
had bootstrapped and it was just me and it was a small company, but it was still a lot of money for me. And my wife is a lawyer, so she was supporting us. And I just felt like I couldn't do this to her anymore. So I decided to go to business school. I thought maybe if I went to business school, I'd get some formal training. And my wife was fully supportive, so I went to business school. And then after that, I was still pretty scarred, and it was 2009. So the economy was in a really bad shape. I was like, I
Yeah.
don't know if I have it in me to do this again. So I went to Amazon. And the idea was I'll go to business school to try and get some business foundations. And then I'll go to Amazon to try and figure out how do you build a world-class product. And as soon as I got to Amazon, I felt like when I was at consulting again, I was learning a lot more. So
Mhm.
I stayed longer because I was learning a tremendous amount. But I had this like that desire to go and start something just like hit me all over again. And so
Mhm.
I was at Amazon almost 2 years, and towards the back half of that, I started to really think about what an idea might look like, and I started to research a whole bunch of different industries and trying to like get deeper on some spaces. And it was nights and weekends just trying to figure it out until I got to something that I thought was a good enough idea. And I didn't have the money to start another business. There was just no way. So I started pitching VCs, and I found a VC in New York, IA Ventures, that basically was like, hey, we think there's something here. We think we like you. We'll give you $100,000 for you to start this. And yeah, go see if you can do it. And so I left Amazon and I started my next business, Thinknear.
And so, what was the what was the problem you were solving with that?
So at Amazon, one of the projects I had worked on was this pricing um, elasticity type of product. So basically, I
Mm.
was in doing DVD, like digital movies and digital TVs, and I was charged with figuring out a pricing strategy for them. And to do that, I went and I talked to all the pricing teams at Amazon, all the retail pricing systems. I was blown away by their sophistication. I was like, man, an SMB just can't compete with this. But what if I build sort of like a pricing system that I can license to SMBs? And the more I thought about it, the more I iterated on it. What I ultimately came down to was um, there are all these businesses with fixed costs, like restaurants and salons. What if I could figure out automatically when they're slow and create these like little ads with coupons and push them out to people nearby? Because this is now, 2010, 2011, the mobile
Mm.
device is in everyone's pocket. It's got a GPS chipset. It's like, I can figure out that this restaurant is slow. Let me go and like send an ad to people nearby with a $5 or $10 discount and see if we can get them some business. And that was the basis of the idea. It was a good enough idea to get funded on. It was actually an awful idea to actually try to build. And there were a
Mm.
bunch of problems with it. The first and most fundamental one was the reason people don't eat at 3 o'clock isn't because it's too expensive, it's because they're not hungry. And there's no amount of technology that's going to
Mm.
change that.
Yeah,
But
I
along
imagine.
the, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just thinking it's like it'd have to be like a massive discount too, like because yeah, you're like if you're not hungry, you're not hungry, so it'd be like it's a free coffee, I might go over and get it, but
Maybe.
yeah, but it's a yeah, it's again like you mentioned these things like you'd never think of it till you've been because I'm like that sounds like a great idea, but it's the experience of actually doing it that teaches all the lessons.
Yeah. And I think like I thought it was a good idea. Investors thought it was a good idea. We raised about 1.5 million to go launch this thing. But within 3 months of like launching this thing, we realized like, man, this is not going to work. It's just not going to work. And I remember like, it's not great when you think you have product market fit and you don't. An even worse feeling is when you know you don't have product market fit and you've just
Mm.
taken a bunch of money from folks. And like, we had a small team, it was four of us, and the energy in the office was so low and it was so hard. And it's like we knew that it wasn't working, but like we were trying to soldier on. And at some point, I just pulled everyone together. I'm like, guys, this isn't working. We know it's not working. Let's go do an offsite and try to figure out what we do. So we get to this offsite. It's just, a couple, like maybe 30, 40 minutes away from our office. It's by
Mm.
the beach. We've got this whiteboard. And I'm like, we have three choices. We keep going, we give back the money, or we see if we learned anything that maybe makes us excited about another idea. And we see if investors are willing to like keep backing us. And we kind of like put the idea on the whiteboard, and I was like, okay, well, what needs to happen for us to feel good about this idea? It's like, well, we've got this idea and this idea and this idea and this idea and this idea. Like, man, every one of these things have to work for this to actually like maybe conceivably work. Like in our hearts, we know it's not going to work. So we're not going to do that. So now do we give the money back or have we learned anything? And we start talking about the things that we had learned. And the thing that was most striking to me was our our idea centered around our ability to be able to push coupons to people through mobile ads. And our assumption was it's 2011. every mobile ad network can push out mobile ads. Like, why would you do mobile ads without location if every phone has a GPS? And like, that's the whole premise, is like, these are portable devices that people are taking with them. And if you know where
Mhm.
they are, you could probably do such great targeting. And we went and we partnered with every major mobile ad network, and none of them could do it. None of them could do it. And so we're like, that's the idea. That's the
Mm.
opportunity. If they can't do it, we're going to build the infrastructure to power location based mobile ads. We spent 6 months building that. Um, and the first month when it was ready was really hard. We couldn't get a single customer. I actually remember a board meeting where I told the board, like, hey guys, I told us to go and pivot. So this is now my second time. And now we're a month in and I haven't sold a single customer. Like, if you guys think it's time to replace me as CEO, like, I get it. And they're like, well, let's wait a little bit. Next day, literally next day, Reebok comes in with not Reebok, sorry, BlackBerry comes in with $150,000 IO, and the next day Reebok with 50,000, and then the next day, and every single day thereafter we sold, we got another deal, and we went
Wow.
from zero to about $200,000 a month in revenue. And a few months after that, a company called Telenav reached out and asked if we could have a strategic conversation and do a BD deal, which turned into an acquisition. And so a year and a half after starting the business, we were acquired.
Wow, that's amazing, and it shows the power of a pivot. Like,
Yeah,
I've been through some of those, and it's yeah, it's a tough thing to do. Like, it's a
it
really tough
is.
thing to do, but it's also when you have to move, you have to move. The market's telling you, right? And um, what what was it that, like, I guess I'm curious, where how did it turn on like that? Like, what caught fire? Was there something that they just seemed to respond to really well, or like, what do you think happened there that all of a sudden they just started rolling in?
So um, we hit like massive tailwinds. Like, this market was just ready to explode because you had everyone having a phone, app usage was exploding. Advertisers knew they needed to advertise on mobile, but they didn't really know what to do with it. And they just needed like some guidance around how to get there. And so we came out and we started evangelizing this idea that, like, it's this portable phone and it's mobile and it's personal. And like, imagine if you knew that they were at a ball game, you'd want to show them ads for like Cracker Jacks, and you see that it's raining outside, and you can tell them, like, send them an umbrella. And we had this like um, analogy that I used to talk about. Like, have you ever been on 34th Street in Manhattan and you see like someone selling like sunglasses and purses, and then all of a sudden it starts to rain and they like flip their cart over and now they're selling umbrellas? I'm like, that's what you should do as advertisers, and we can give you that information to get that level of personalization and situational awareness. And basically the reason it took a month to sell is just because like people needed to go through their normal like buying process,
Sales
and I
process, yeah,
didn't know what that was like. I'd
yeah.
never done it before. And so like, it was the right message at the right time with the right like tailwinds. And you know in retrospect, I made so many mistakes about how I sold it and how I approached it and how we built it, all these mistakes, but it didn't matter because the tailwinds were so strong that it was almost like it was gonna like wash away any mistakes we made.
It's amazing how important timing is, and it's the one thing that you really don't know until hindsight. Generally, like, you can have a sense at the time, but a lot of it is like, entrepreneurs oftentimes like, timing's now. Truthfully, it's a little early. That's usually what
Yeah, it's so
happens,
easy
right?
to be early. We thought we
Yeah.
were late, by the way. We thought we were super late because everyone was talking about like all the ad networks were saying location, and it was only because we tried to do that other thing that we realized, like, wait, this is not solved yet. That's crazy.
Mm.
And then we went and solved it. But like, our initial reaction when we saw that it wasn't solved was, no, it's got to be solved. Like, we must be talking to the wrong people. Like, it just, and investors, when we told them about the pivot, they're like, wait, that seems like a super crowded market. Are you sure you want to go do that? But we weren't early. We weren't late. We hit it.
Just bang on time. How I'm actually curious, just more on the execution side. Like, at that time, how did you, like, were the ads, were they sent to a browser, like when people, like a Google ad, or how did they actually receive the ads? I'm sort of curious.
Yeah, so they had to be using an app that was part of like that we had access to. And
Okay,
so like, if you saw a little ad at the bottom, like there were already tons of ads in these apps that were happening. We were just giving them location as one of the targeting
gotcha.
parameters. We were saying, like, instead of just showing like a Nike ad, make it a Nike ad relevant to the fact that they're doing X, Y, or Z, or that they're, or show them that there's a nearby Nike store. And we were powering that part of the experience, but it was all
Oh,
in app.
okay. Okay. Yeah, really interesting. So obviously a massive whirlwind. You're only in that for a year and a half. You come out the other side. Do you take a break for a bit or do you just kind of dive into something else?
No, so I stayed on at the acquiring company for 2 years, which was
Okay.
awesome. I learned a lot and they were great and it was a really good experience. And but the pace was a little bit less intense. It didn't feel existential every day. So in that sense, I felt like um I was recuperating in some degree. But the moment my 2 years were up, I jumped into the next business. It wasn't even
Mhm.
like a week later. I remember I ended on, I think it was a Tuesday, and the next day I had a conference for the new business. So I was like so ready to go and get started. And part of it was just hubris, like, wow, this was so much fun. It was such a whirlwind. Look how fast we did it. We're so good. And not recognizing, like, man, we got so friggin' lucky with the timing. We got so friggin' lucky. And so I was just like, let's do it again. Let's do it every 18 months. We're just going to go and do this. And so I started my next business without any time off. And that was a huge mistake. I was burnt out. Even though
Mhm.
it was a very good experience, it was a very tiring, hard experience. And I was burnt out. And once you start a company, you're stuck. Like you can't take a break after. And
No.
this next one, I hit the timing totally wrong. I like the tailwinds were headwinds, and it took us 6 years to build this one. But I was stuck. There was nothing I could do, and I really was tired. I actually ended up in the hospital about 4 or 5 months into the business just because the stress was so intense and I was so already burnt out that I
Mhm.
ended up in the hospital for 2 weeks just from stress.
Oh, wow. And unfortunately that isn't an unfamiliar, like I've heard that from a lot of entrepreneurs and I've had, some challenges through as well. And it's the stress and the anxiety, like it's hard to relate unless you've been there, but as soon as you've been there, everyone can relate, right? Because
Yeah.
it can be such a challenge. And you're right. Like when I sold my first business, like I had a creative agency for over a decade and we grew to a nice little agency, do mostly government work. And then you mentioned 2008, 2009, and we switched over to almost, having to change everything to sell to corporate and all of that. And when I sold that business, I didn't even have an idea for another business, but I had incorporated a business the next day, and it's just because mentally I couldn't, like I just couldn't not. It's like free fall, like you're floating, and I'm like I just
Yeah.
started a business. I didn't know what I was going to do. I just incorporated a business, and then it took me a while till I kind of did a bunch of consulting things until I came up with this idea for Dryrun that really came from my experience in 2008 and 2009. But yeah, it's like I could have taken a month or a
I
couple of
love
months
that.
at least. Nope, just
I can relate, man. I can relate. I don't know what it is about our wiring that makes us do that, but it's not the healthiest of our traits.
it's not, but it's kind of universal for entrepreneurs somehow.
Yeah.
So what was this business that you dove into? I'd love to hear about it and just the challenges because you said like this was headwinds. This took a lot longer. What was this business that you built?
So the name of the company was Sense 360, and the initial idea for it was, hey, we're doing all this stuff with location data to target ads. I feel like there's more we can do. And what I started to get very excited about was, and just to orient you, this was late 2014, early 2015. And Samsung and Apple were in this arms race to put more and more sensors into the phone. And
Mm,
so it started with GPS and then accelerometer and gyroscope and barometer and ambient light and all these sensors. And I was like, man, you could build some incredible apps if you knew how to take advantage of all of this data.
mhm,
And I was like, well, what if we build a developer tool where basically you just put in our SDK into your app and then you have access to all of this data in a really easy way so that you can say, like, if you're Uber and you see someone leaving, like, go to a bar and like they're leaving and you can like hit them with a notification that says, hey, do you need a car ride home? And your Spotify and someone gets into a gym and you could be like, do you need a workout playlist? And we thought there'd be like all these really cool experiences that we could build off of this data. It was a really hard business to build for a whole bunch of reasons. One is app developers just had so many SDKs. They were just not willing to put another SDK. They didn't see this as like core. They saw this as like a nice add-on gimmick.
mm,
Um, there weren't that many use cases. Like we could come up with 15 or 20 that sounded great in an investor deck, but then when we actually tried to like build an entire business around it, there just weren't enough cases where you would want all this data. And also Apple and Android started to make this data easier and more accessible and like started to build it into their core platform. So
Hmm.
um, made it a very hard business to like build out. And so we were building it for like the first year, and we were doing hackathons, and we were getting developers, and it kind of got to the same feeling that I had with my first business. It was like, this is not working. Like we've got to orient from like pivot from here. And the so this time it wasn't like a full offsite. I was like, I'm so cooked. I need 2 days just by myself. I went down to San Diego and I just spent 2 days walking on the beach, just thinking and thinking and thinking. And what I came to was we one of the things we had to do to try and build our algorithms to detect all of these situations was we had this survey that we would send people, and people would tell us, like we would ask them, hey, we think you're here and we think you're doing this, are we right or wrong? And they would tell us, and they were super happy to tell us, and we would give them points or incentives, and we were getting all this data that was making our algorithms better. And we were like, well, maybe that's the business. What if we like work with coupon apps and survey apps and all these apps where customers are fine sharing their data in exchange for points or money or something, and the business becomes the data that we're collecting. And we go to restaurants, we go to retailers, and we tell them, hey, we can power a real-time dashboard that helps you understand what percentage of your customers are going to your competitors, where else are they going, what do they like, what do they not like, basically build a real-time market research engine on the backs of all this incredible data that we were collecting. And so that's what we pivoted into, and we started to like really figure it out on the commercial side, where we were getting some of the biggest. We signed up like 30 of the top 50 restaurant chains in the world on, $100,000 plus contracts to get access to this dashboard. The the headwinds were twofold. One is there were so many privacy implications around what we were doing, and it didn't matter how much we tried to like go way beyond the like regulations and the best practices, and like we really innovated on the privacy side in ways that I'm really proud of, but it didn't matter. There was just so much like headwind around data and privacy and all this regulation and all this like investor like nervousness around it, and even customers were nervous around it. So that created a lot of obstacle. And then the second thing was like to do this well, we had to go so deep at for each vertical. Like we really needed to make sure that we were creating a dashboard that was super specific to the restaurant industry. And then we wanted to go into the next one, and it was all this work to do that. And none of these verticals alone were big enough to have a big enough market. So we had tailwinds and a smallish market, and that made it really tough. And I feel like with ThinkNear, I didn't execute very well. I wasn't that good. I was very young, was very immature. I made a lot of mistakes. I felt like I executed very well as a team. We executed really well at Sense 360, but it took us 6 years. And it was hard, and we had a lot of like near death experiences. So but ultimately we were approached by Medallia, which is a market research and like a voice of the customer company. They reached out and they said, hey, we love what you guys are doing. We were doing some partnerships, so we had really started to crack our second or third vertical, and they're like, hey, let's figure out a way to do this more strategically. And that turned into an acquisition conversation, and ultimately an exit, but a much harder one for sure.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and that sounds almost more typical and frankly fairly quick in 6 years, because you always hear the 10-year overnight success, right? Like that's
Right. Yeah.
just what it usually is. So still like again, just sort of a pivot and really learning and learning and learning and taking those strides was so critical. Um, so it was about 2021ish, I think, if I do my math
2020.
right.
So yeah, the
2020.
acquisition closed in September of 2020.
Okay. And did you stay on with them for a term as well, or?
Yeah, I stayed on for a little bit over 2 years. I really
Okay.
liked working at Medallia. I
Yeah.
really like it was such an interesting company because they were so entrepreneurial. They were buying companies right and left. They were like they really gave us space to kind of figure it out. I really enjoyed my time there.
Yeah. That's good to hear, because like most entrepreneurs, they just, even if they like it, they just don't last long at a,
Yeah.
when they're not on their own. So what did that lead to? Like when you exited there, that was just a few years ago now, and I know you're on to a new venture. Tell me a little bit about like the transition there and the opportunity you see here.
Yeah, so we had across the two businesses, one thing that I think we did well is we had a very customer first bent. Like we really cared what our customer was saying. We really tried to listen. I spent
Hmm.
so much time with customers, and that served us incredibly well. It served us well at Think Near because it helped us identify the pivot really quickly. It helped us with one of the things that the acquirer said when they reached out to our customers is just how much they loved us, that they just thought we were so good at listening. And then at Sense 360, again, we listen, listen, listen. That led us to the pivot. But we had this one near death experience during COVID where we were our markets were retail and restaurants, and they got decimated in the early days of COVID. And five of our top customers reached out to us in the first week of COVID, and they said, "Hey, listen, we're closing every one of our stores. You're selling us location-based data. We have no one coming into our stores. So you have two choices. You can invoice us because we do have a contract and we're not going to pay you because we don't have the money to pay you, and we'll never work with you again. Or you can give us a break and then hopefully things come back and at some point we work together again." And I think we had two choices in that moment. We could have like listened and been like, oh, I guess that means that like they need a break and like kind of tried to figure out how to extend runway and do all these things. Or we could have like really internalized what they were saying, really listened. What they were telling us is, you're not valuable to us right now, so we can't pay you. But they were still keeping other stuff on. And we listened, we internalized, we talked to them, we tried to figure out what really they needed from us and realized that actually, like our foot traffic data wasn't super valuable, but we had all this other data and we could basically create a COVID dashboard for them to understand, well, people are still eating. Where are they eating? How are they eating? How do I reach them? How do I morph my business? How do we become more strategic? And we went into hyperdrive and like built that for them in a matter of weeks. And those customers came back to us and we started to grow. And I think that was the real impetus for Medallia acquiring us. And the lesson across all of this is just how important it is to listen to customers. And I felt like
Yeah.
across those two businesses, it was very hard. It was something that I had to spend so much of my time doing. And when large language models came out, I started to think maybe there's a way to systematize this idea of listening to customers, of creating feedback loops, of making sure the CEO and the COO and the CMO and the product team and the customer success team, everyone is listening to customers. And I felt like we could turn that into both an automated systematic process and a real competitive advantage for companies. And so when I left Medallia, I started to think about this and started to think about how this could potentially function and operate. And then that's what BackEngine turned into. It's basically a way for B2B businesses to listen to their customers and really understand what those customers need at scale.
It's boy, I can identify with the problem you're solving because like early on in our Dryrun days, like I said, we thought we had product market fit twice, and there we grew, and there were elements that it was reasonable to sort of think that and kind of make that mistake a bit, um, until we came to the realization that we're growing, but it's going to start to flatline because this just isn't the right group. We don't have product market fit the way we thought we did. And we realized we don't have product market fit because we've been chasing after kind of the wrong customers, and our best customers were back in the corner and we never talked with them. And it was such a lesson. And we basically went back to the ground floor and rebuilt the product and talked with customers as much as we could. And it started out tough to get in front of people and get to talk with them. And it just kept growing and growing and growing until the point where it's like we have conversations every day. But we also, the team changed, the culture changed without a lot of pushing. And it got to the point where we had to start building systems for ourselves to track these conversations that we're having with customers because everybody wanted to see it. And everybody, and it was really interesting to have a culture shift like that where everybody now wants to know, like kick down the door. What did they say? What did you heard talk to someone? What did they say? What did they say? Like everyone wants to know. And so we built our own colloquial, and we're a small business, right? Like we're a startup. And so, but the value of that, it's like we've learned over this last while, it's like, this is painted the path. This is exactly what you need to do. And it's reinforced every day. And then there's new information every day. The value to that is what I think transforms a startup. So I think you've hit on something that's incredibly important, not just for startups, of course, but I'm just looking at it from a startup point of view. That's absolute gold, right?
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I feel like there's so many decisions that we have to make as entrepreneurs and as businesses. Like, what features are we going to build, and what bugs are we going to fix, and how are we going to price this, and how are we going to talk about it, and who's our ICP, and like this stuff is really hard to get right. And yet we have customers. Like, the more we grow, the more customers we have that we can tap into. I kind of
Mhm.
think about it a little bit like a restaurant. I I love going out to eat with my wife, and every time we go out, we sit at a table, and a waiter or waitress comes over, and they start like talking to us. And over the course of 2 hours, we're going to share feedback on what dishes we liked, what dishes we didn't like, whether the music was too loud, whether we liked the playlist, whether the prices were good, if there were any issues with service. And most of the time, that feedback dies with the waiter because that waiter has 8 or 9 other tables, and
Yeah.
there are 3 or 4 other waiters. And so, like, the chef might hear something anecdotally, but like, he's not going to have real data on which dishes are working and which ones are not and which ones are salty. And so what we do is like think of it as like a little listening device at every table that's listening for all of that, all of the stuff that I'm saying and my wife is saying and every other table is saying. And it's basically turning into structured data that automatically flows into the menu planning board and automatically flows to the manager and automatically flows to the um, maitre d. And that's what we're doing in a B2B setting. We're making sure that everything customers are saying, because businesses talk to their customers all the time. We're
Mhm.
making sure that all of that information is being structured and made sure that the right people are seeing it. So that if like anything changes in the business, anything needs to be prioritized, anything needs to be done, everyone is rooted in what the customers are saying.
I know scale is like one of the like obviously a big challenge, especially as you get to bigger businesses. Like you said, now you have a whole bunch of people on the team, all the way up to the C-suite that needs something. But I imagine they also need different, right? Like someone at the front line customer support, well, they kind of need this, but as you go up and up and up, you kind of need different information. Um, how do you sort of tackle that, and how do you scale something like this and still make it really effective?
Yeah, it's a really, really interesting question, and this is where I think I'm um, maybe a contrarian. I think best practice with a startup is like find one very, very niche user and like satisfy their problem fully, and then expand from there. And I think with AI, it's become so much faster and easier to build software that there's an opportunity to think about problems that hit multiple people and where you have multiple people that you have to solve for. And I think our problem is one of those where, like you said before, every single person at a company wants access to that customer data. It's so valuable, it's so helpful. That voice of the customer matters so much. And so we're really trying to build it in a way where we become that central repository, that source of truth for um, what customers are saying. And that means that we have to make sure that we're making it accessible for the product team and the marketing team and the executive team and the CS team and the sales team and so on and so forth. And so we're really spending a lot of time trying to think through that. The benefit of it is as we scale, or as companies that use us get bigger and bigger, and we're starting to see that happen pretty dramatically, we've already thought through a lot of the ways that you need to make build this from a permissioning standpoint and from an access standpoint, and also from just like how this data gets presented so that it's viable in a bigger organization. And I think what you were getting at is something we're absolutely seeing, which is the bigger the company is, the more valuable it becomes, because the more layers there are, the more distance there is between the customer and the people who are making decisions and taking action, and the more we can help by bridging that distance. So it's
Mhm.
still very early for us, but so far I've been very excited by what I've seen.
Yeah, and it's a bit of a lesson that we've learned here at Dryrun. Like when we started, like our little pivots were basically we moved up market. And the reason we moved up market is because we got pulled there, and we got pulled there because the challenges they have are so much more complicated and so much messier. And when, a CFO comes in and they're almost pleading or dropping F bombs or whatever, you're like, yeah, these guys, they have a problem here. Like they really need a solution. And when we were serving the lower end of the market, it was too often, sounds great, you know nice is a bit of a nice to have rather than a need to have, right? and
Yeah.
and I think that's where you guys have hit the nail on the head. Like I said, we do it internally, we kind of have our own systems. But where I can see the challenge starts to get, it compounds as the business goes up in size, and the problem gets so much bigger, but the dollars and the risk are all, bigger too. So that reward should be bigger. So tell me a little bit about like who should be getting in touch with you if they want to learn about BackEngine.
Yeah, I think it's any business that is dealing with customers that are other businesses and where the price point is high enough where they're actually setting up a post-sale organization where you have a CS team or an account management team or others that are talking to those customers, because there is so much gold that is happening in those conversations and we can help you unlock it. And so we work with companies as early as Series A all the way to massive companies, and we're finding that there is so much value. The net result of actually implementing a systematic feedback loop, a systematic way of capturing everything that customers are saying, higher customer satisfaction scores, higher retention, higher upsells, higher competitive, like basically out competing competitors, and higher win rates. So basically, every metric that matter goes up if you can do this, and it makes sense. It's obvious. If everyone is hearing the customer, everyone gets aligned around it. You're building the right things. You're servicing them the right way. They're happier. They feel heard. And that's actually one of the things that I'm most proud of. If like we obviously get a tremendous amount of feedback from our customers because we are very good at collecting it. And what we hear like the most is that we are exceptional at making them feel heard. They give us feedback and it gets implemented. And that's us eating our own dog food. And
Mhm.
and so yeah, very excited about for anyone to reach out who wants to talk about how they can implement a systematic feedback loop.
And how should they find you and find BackEngine?
Yeah, so they can visit our site at backengine.ai. They can email me at eli@backengine.ai. We're on LinkedIn. We're all over the place. They can follow us there, and yeah, just reach out. Be happy to chat.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, Ellie. This was a really interesting conversation. You've had so many interesting experiences too, so I just really enjoyed unpacking all of this and hearing some of the challenges of scaling, and also like it's kind of cool to hear like a year and a half blazing fast win, which is those are pretty rare. So that was really cool to hear. But
Thank
thanks
you.
so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. This was really fun. I really appreciate it, Blaine.
And for those of you out there, especially if you're a CFO, please come visit us at dryrun.com. We're going to help you understand exactly where your business is going. And the more complex, honestly, the better. We're going to help you understand, what's happening in all of your different locations, what's happening, especially in your cash flow, but also your revenue, tariffs, all of the things that you have to deal with right now. Come visit us at dryrun.com and we will help you get out of those spreadsheets and get answers fast.